The United Nations is celebrating its 80th anniversary, but instead of looking back, all eyes are on a potentially historic diplomatic showdown this week. We're witnessing a tsunami of international recognition for a Palestinian state, and it's headed straight for the UN. The week kicks off with a special UN summit on the two-state solution, co-sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia, with major Western powers, led by France, now publicly pledging to formally recognize Palestine. A while ago, Britain, Canada and Australia recognized the state of Palestine, with Portugal joining the list, planning to announce its recognition ahead of the General Assembly. This is not just another routine UN gathering. It signals a pivotal moment where decades of diplomatic stalemate may be giving way to a new political reality on the global stage. The question now is, will this wave of recognition finally force a new path forward? Let's find out. I'm Hani Asif, and let's go in depth. As world leaders arrive in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, the organization is marking its 80th anniversary. Yet, according to the New York Times, the mood is far from celebratory. The gathering is shadowed by escalating wars, financial strains, and growing doubts about the UN's relevance. Each year, the gathering brings bold proposals and grand visions, but meaningful outcomes often remain elusive. This year is no different, with the challenges facing the UN more apparent than ever, the newspaper noted. Despite these struggles, the annual meeting remains the world's premier diplomatic stage. Over 140 world leaders, including US President Donald Trump, are expected to attend what some call the World Cup of Diplomacy. This year, the stage is set against the backdrop of the devastating war in Gaza, with global attention intensely focused on Israel's actions and the worsening humanitarian crisis. As the UN marks its 80th anniversary, the week will begin with a high-level conference on Palestinian statehood tomorrow, co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia. Britain, Australia and Canada announced recently their recognition of the state of Palestine ahead of a pivotal week at the UN General Assembly, where the issue is likely to dominate discussions. Following their announcement today, France and other major Western countries plan to announce their recognition at the UN high-level meeting.
Alongside a viable Palestinian state. At the moment, we have neither. Ordinary people, Israeli and Palestinian, deserve to live in peace, to try to rebuild their lives free from violence and suffering. That's what the British people
And to go deeper into this story, we're joined by Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst from Washington, and by Dr. Majid Boudin, the international law professor in Paris. Welcome to In Depth. Dr. Boudin, Britain, Canada and Australia have just announced their recognition of the Palestinian state. How does the timing of these announcements ahead of the General Assembly maximize their impact?
Well, it's a political move, and it's a very good move, it's a historical move. It makes Britain and the other countries, Great Britain and the other countries, in compliance with international law obligations. So it's very important why UK has decided to make the recognition one day before the General Assembly meeting. It's to make a difference, but whatever are the political meanings, it's a fact now, and this fact is important. And it goes in the same trend with the other countries that they are going to recognize the Palestinian state tomorrow, France and the other countries. And there is now a move, there is a trend, and this is, it makes that nearly all countries will go in that way. It doesn't mean that it will be, it's against some other countries. It means that this process will continue, and they did not obey to the pressure that the government of Netanyahu is doing. The pressure was very heavy, was very important. There are threats, and despite all this, the UK government and the French government and other governments are going ahead because they say now the limits are there, and they must make a turning point. And this is a game changer in the construction of the two-state solution. Mm-hmm. That we will see that in a certain time, the U.S. will recognize the Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Chapman, do you agree that maybe this recognition right before the General Assembly session, the UN General Assembly session actually takes place, do you feel it is quite impactful?
Yes, well, first, Mr. Haney, thank you for having us today, and greetings to your other guest. And yes, it is highly significant and impactful that tomorrow's General Assembly meeting, the discussion of Palestine, the two-state solution, this all happens on the 80th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations. Also, it's significant because this is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and we are historically living through a time that we have the conditions that are ripe for World War III. So this makes it much more impactful, and additionally, we've seen over the past few days, Secretary General Antonio Guterres giving presentations, press conferences, speeches, where he is talking about the original United Nations Charter. First, how this language covers all of the situations we're seeing today, and secondly, how this is a time to reiterate, to emphasize, and to go back to the first principles of the UN Charter, which is guaranteeing protection for oppressed people, for stabilizing countries, and for protecting and promoting democracy. Mm-hmm. All of this is coming to a head now. It's highlighted by the United States not issuing visas for the senior Palestinian delegation. We do have the technology that they can be there by video conference. They have a backup delegation already in New York. However, the contrast right now the contrast could not be starker between the United Nations Charter and mandate and the conditions we are seeing now in Palestine, and
Yes.
indeed across the entire world.
Well, we will get to the visa situation a little bit later on, but speaking of the language being used to dodge a World War III scenario, year after year the world leaders make ambitious speeches at the General Assembly. So do you think that there is such a gap between the rhetoric and real concrete action?
Yes, Mr. Haney, you put your finger on exactly the point of contention, which is that for decades we have seen world leaders stand up and make pretty speeches. There is a lot of rhetoric, but the rhetoric has never matched the action until now. This is unprecedented. After 77 years, the events of the past few years have apparently become so extreme that the world finally has to stop making pretty speeches and start taking action. And indeed, we're all aware of the events of the past few months, the bombing in Doha, the 12-day war. So all of these events have appeared to come to a head. And even with the contention, the acrimony, even with the conflicts over the annual meeting that starts tomorrow, we are seeing world leaders press ahead. And it is significant that the Canada, the UK, Australia, Spain, all of these nations are finally lining up behind public admission that the two-state solution will create peace, and furthermore, taking action to somehow finally bring that about. And I do agree with your other guest when he said that at some point, even America will have to take note and will have to recognize the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to their own state. We did see just this past week, for the first time ever, Senate Democrats introduced a resolution in the United States Senate to recognize Palestine as a state for the two-state solution. But essentially, for the first time ever, we have a resolution before the Senate to recognize Palestine as a state. And this is coming on the heels of the upcoming Senate battle, the upcoming congressional battle that we are going to have over Trump trying to give Israel another $6 billion in weapons. He is doing this to make up for the embargo and export bans that other nations are actively now enacting. So yes, the world is changing because nations are taking action finally to back up their rhetoric and their fancy speeches.
Dr. Boudin, the UN is marking its 80th anniversary. However, it is overshadowed by a somber global landscape and the ongoing wars. What does this tell us about the organization's current state, its relevance, and its ability to address today's crises?
We have to recall now that the UN has obligations. They have international obligations, and the two chapters. The first chapter is the own treaty which created the UN, and the charter of the UN. The treaty and the charter, they put obligations and they make a mandate, they specify the mandate, and they say the UN is designed to keep peace, or to create peace, or to protect to protect populations around the world in a peaceful situation. The second point, which is the second chapter, is important and even more important, which is that the UN as a international organization has duties, and these duties are ruled by international public customary law of responsibility of international organizations. This corpus of law was codified by the UN itself in 2011, and it says that an international organization, as the UN, like the UN, has these international obligations to protect populations, to protect peace. And the fact that there is an omission to act and to let killing people, making starvation, is mixed duties on the UN and on each member state of the UN to not allow these killings. And if there is a failure or a mission or an omission to act, the responsibility of the UN itself and of each member state can be questioned under international law, and the case can be brought before the International Court of Justice. And this is serious. And the tools are there. How we came into that? We came into that because after this incredible killings and genocide and war crimes, the conscience in the world has changed, has shifted. And therefore, the governments, especially the governments of state law and of democratic countries and countries obeying to the rule of the law, they know that their populations will not accept anymore, and they're elected by these people, and therefore they have moved to discharge themselves from their international obligations and to satisfy this rule of international law. Mm-hmm. And that's why we are moving ahead, and this is a very positive matter. The UN is an irreplaceable institution. We have to keep the UN and to safeguard the UN. But the safeguarding the UN means also to seek that the UN will discharge itself from its international obligations, which are here to protect the Palestinian people and all populations in the world under these killings and these massacres.
Well, Ms. Chapman, how has the genocidal war then on Gaza transformed the typical diplomatic agenda at this year's General Assembly, making it the central focus for so many leaders? It is taking over all the meetings on the sidelines, all the sessions that are taking place surrounding the UN General Assembly.
Yes, well, we have seen a flurry of activity in the UN General Assembly over the past couple of months. We've seen many speeches, many emergency sessions. We've seen the representative from Algeria, Pakistan, Korea, all reiterating their support for the United Nations Charter and for their obligations to take preventative action and also to punish the actions of genocide and human rights violations, war crimes. I greatly appreciate your other guests' reiteration of Chapter 1 and the United Nations mandate. And we are seeing more discussion of Chapter 7. And Chapter 7 is the chapter that gives the United Nations the authority to go into Palestine with a peacekeeping force that has a specific mandate to stop the war crimes, which would give a United Nations peacekeeping force the authority to actively engage with the IDF troops if the IDF troops do not cease committing war crimes. And this is going to be, Chapter 7 will be the next issue of discussion before the United Nations. But right now we have been seeing the Commissioner for Human Rights, Tom Fletcher. We have seen Francesca Albanese, members that are tasked specifically with monitoring and speaking up about the inhumane conditions, humanitarian crimes conducted in Palestine. And essentially, we have seen more discussion than ever. But this is not empty discussion. This is healthy discussion that we see is actually leading to concrete, specific steps and actionable steps that members of the United Nations can take. This is a very complex situation. As we've seen, other events can reinforce this. The strike on the negotiating team in Doha was a critical factor that has propelled other nations to realize that we have a situation where Israel is out of control, and because of the backing of the United States, the backing of America, other countries are now at risk of unprovoked attack, and indeed this has shaken up the entire diplomatic order, not just the Gulf states saying, can the United States reasonably protect us anymore? And this has shaken faith and trust in the United States. This has also prompted other countries such as Turkey to step up to the plate. There is going to be a significant meeting between Washington and Turkey later this month in September, where President Erdogan will be able to express his opinions to President Trump. We will see where that goes. But in the meantime, this and other significant events hang over the United Nations as they grapple with what actions, specific, narrow, actionable steps they need to take now in order to bring a halt to the ongoing humanitarian crimes and the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing that we are seeing in Palestine, in Gaza, as well as the West Bank. So we are seeing more action on the part of the United Nations. It looks as though they are just continuing speeches, but behind these speeches, there are mechanisms for action that the world will insist that the United Nations take now, especially under Chapter 7 as opposed to Chapter 6, which is just establishing peace. Under Chapter 7, Chapter 6, under Chapter 7, the United Nations can take action to establish the peace.
Dr. Boudin, many countries have been calling for the two-state solution. Now, how is the overwhelming UN General Assembly vote on the New York Declaration setting the stage for tomorrow's summit on the two-state solution?
Well, it will be another positive and constructive step. There will be a vote which will have a huge majority, but we have to recall something important, that the Palestinian state is a self-standing right. This is the right of the Palestinians. It doesn't depend on the recognition of other states, but the recognition is important to establish relations with the Palestinian state. It doesn't mean that if the Palestinian state is not recognized, that the Palestinians, they have no rights. It means that the international community has failed to recognize a self-standing right, which is an acquired right of any nation, because under international law, self-determination is made by the population itself, by that people itself, by the Palestinian people here. So this is important. So it's not, the recognition is not a right granted, it's the recognition of a self-standing right. And here, how this will move, and this is very important that the international community is moving toward this, toward establishing relations with the Palestinian state. How we move, how the international community will move. The only way now, after all these killings and after covering all these massacres, the protection of the Palestinian population is an obligation to the United Nations. And this obligation now, there is one way to discharge the UN from its responsibility, is to use effectively Chapter 7. How this chapter mechanism is working. Chapter 7 is implemented by the Security Council. And the Security Council, the permanent members have a veto that they can oppose. And here, a question must be put now, how this veto is working, why the veto was designed. The veto was designed to protect the peace and to keep the peace and to protect weak populations. So the veto is not designed to let an aggressor kill, make a genocide. Mm-hmm. So veto must be questioned, not of how can a country use the veto or not, but to be questioned, and through a legal mechanism is to go before the International Court of Justice and ask for an advisory opinion. Any state can do it. The Secretary General of the UN can do it and ask the International Court of Justice to say whether the veto could be used to allow a killing on a large scale and to allow a genocide. And here, under international, we know what is the answer, which is under international law that the veto is not designed to allow a killing. And then there is, because under international law, any power, yes, veto, has limitations, and these limitations makes that the Charter 7 can be implemented and the veto cannot be used because it's a misuse of power. Mm-hmm. And there is a possibility, and therefore we have to go before the International Court of Justice to request an advisory opinion.
Yes.
This is the best way to go to implement this and to protect this population and put an end to this massacre and to have
yes, and hopefully it does get to that end. Now, Ms. Chapman, the U.S. has taken a strong stance by denying the visas to the Palestinian officials. So what does this diplomatic showdown reveal about the current state of the U.S. foreign policy on this issue?
Yes, well, as it is evident to the world, American foreign policy on this issue is in chaos. It appears our president, Donald Trump, is trying to serve two masters. He is trying to serve the interests of the American people and also the interests of Israel, which right now are directly opposed to the interests of America as well as the rest of the world, because they have embarked on their expansionist agenda and their Greater Israel project. And because of Netanyahu's desperation, and Israel has escalated their actions, we see the United Nations in response has also escalated actions. Your other guest has commented on the ongoing consistent American veto of the Security Council's ability to take any action. And we see other mechanisms. You mentioned the New York resolution. Also, we've seen a lot of discussion of the Unifying for Peace, which allows a workaround of the American veto. This is what was used in Kosovo to get around I believe it was the Russian veto to allow United Nations peacekeeping forces to go into Kosovo. We can do something like that again. However, once again, it's a race against time. We are racing against the continuing, ongoing, relentless killing of the Palestinian people. More are being killed every day.
Yes.
And we are also racing against the bureaucratic administrative process of the United Nations. We do have this Unifying for Peace workaround. However, it does also appear that the mounting pressure from other nations are acting to have America question our role. To the American people, it's unclear whether President Trump can break free of the Israeli grasp on our foreign policy, not
yes.
just with the Middle East, but other countries. Our foreign policy is in tatters. But this is unsustainable for us because practical considerations such as the United States running out of weapons to supply to other nations. More importantly, we are running out of political will in the face of images of genocide coming from the Middle East.
Well, you
So
were
we
very
will
right,
have to-
Miss. Yes, you were very right, Miss Chapman. Well, one thing we are running out of is time with the continuous deaths and the death toll that is rising in Gaza and the whole of Palestine. And unfortunately, that's all the time also we have for this episode of In Depth. I'd like to thank Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst, and Dr. Majid Boudin, the international law professor. Thank you very much for joining us and for your valuable insights. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.